Once in a while, you come across a device that first seems bizarre, but quickly invokes a feeling of, this makes sense. One such device is the IINE Mouse-Pad Controller. It fits somewhere between the Steam controller and one of these ultra portable laptops. Before I continue, I quickly want to mention that I got the IINE for free in collaboration with AliExpress. My opinions are, however, only my own uninfluenced personal bias. Now, I got it in this sleek black-orange color, but you can also get it in pink and white. That is as long as you go for the wired version. I myself got the slightly more expensive wireless version, which besides the wireless also has a built-in 6-axis gyro. But more to that later. First of all, in the box, you get the controller itself, a wireless dongle, and a decently long USB-C cable. When I took out the IINE, I immediately noticed how light it was, especially in the right side. Now, this is not a bad thing. The right hand is not doing as much support work as with other controllers, and it feels better when the right side isn't as heavy. But they overlooked one detail that I wish a possible V2 could fix. The emptiness. The IINE is quite hollow, which is very audible when using the mouse wheel, mousepad or function buttons. I'm almost tempted to open it up and stuff a piece of sponge or an old sock into it, just to improve the sound profile. But how does it actually feel to hold? Pretty good, I'd say. The IINE fits great in my hands. Every button makes sense and feels intentionally placed. I really like the buttons on the back and wish that this could become a standard. I have a few controllers that have back pedals, but the position always felt slightly off, and often they are just there to rebind another key to instead of having their own action. Speaking of bindings, the IINE itself binds itself to clearly labeled keyboard keys. The only exceptions are the mouse buttons and the joystick, which I assume to be X input based. Now to the big feature of this controller, the mousepad. One of the features that they advertise is the big mousepad area, but personally in standard play I only use about 50% of it. I can see though how this can come in handy in RTSs and such. But of course the big one here is the use for good old first-person shooters. I had to test it with a game that I'm really comfortable in, which is Call of Duty World at War, and out of the box it actually felt great. It took me a while, and still does, to get used to, but already on my second try I felt good using the IINE. Now it can't replace a keyboard and mouse for me, but it was miles better than a regular controller. I can actually see people getting really good at using one of these, and especially on console becoming absolute frag gods. A thing that really didn't appeal to me though was the gyro. At first the IINE was set to one of two 4-axis modes, which felt awful to use, and I don't understand why that is the default. Once I set it to the 6-axis mode, it became usable. It still was tricky however, and it will take longer to get used to. I do however appreciate how you can set any of the keys to a so-called action key that is used to turn on the gyro only when you hold it. This way you can reduce the shake when going for big movements with the mousepad and fine adjustments with the gyro, and I think that is the primary playstyle as a gyro player. To further check how well it worked in first-person shooters, I used one of these aim trainers. Now I absolutely sucked compared to using my mouse. Blaming it entirely on the controller though would be me pulling a DSP. I still need to fine-tune the triangle of mouse sensitivity, acceleration and using the mousepad itself. As an example, just as I was writing this, I tried again and improved from an average of 50 points to 75 points with some minor tweaks. Now I also tried some other games, notably Dark Souls and Love 3. Both were no problem and just required me to mess with the bindings. Dark Souls in particular is a game that took me a while to get the bindings right. Something that I would love to see though is a way to switch the D-pad from being bound to the 1, 2, 3 and 4 keys to an actual input device. This would have made binding some keys much easier. Speaking of the D-pad, it's not the best one I used in my life. It feels like a stiffer PS4 D-pad. Now, some of you might like that, but I'm way more fond of the Nintendo styled ones, especially for platformers like Love. I can see, however, how the PS style makes more sense for buttons that are essentially separate keys. One thing I'm a bit particular about is the sounds that the buttons make when pressed. As for the IINE, the top, right and back buttons all use very nice switches that feel and sound great. The stick is pretty standard, and the D-pad uses a membrane which is a bit stiff, thus creating a sharper sound than a regular one. The buttons around the D-pad itself use some louder switches that feel a bit cheap and also create a less pleasant sound. I wonder why they didn't just use the same ones as for the other buttons. Now, this doesn't bother me too much, but what does bother me is the mouse wheel click, mouse pad click and the function button. All three are very loud in comparison to the other ones. The wheel on a regular mouse usually doesn't sound much different than the left and right clicks. But in this case it is a very stiff button that, in conjunction with the hollowness, produces a loud click. The function button probably uses the same switch as the mouse wheel. Now, with the mouse pad, besides the loud noise, you can actually feel the echo slightly vibrate throughout the controller. One last thing I want to mention is the native compatibility for the IINE. It claims to work with Sony and Microsoft's current consoles. I have neither and couldn't verify this myself, but there are videos of others that have tested this, seemingly without issues. Now to wrap things up. I can wholeheartedly recommend the IINE Mouse-Pad Controller. Sure, it has its flaws and certainly needs some getting used to, but I'm already in love with it and will keep using it in the foreseeable future. If you now think you want one for yourself, you can find links to it in the description.